Today we continue our exposition of the book of Romans. We are at verse 19 and 20 of chapter 1. It reads as follows: Because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. Verse 20, For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. One of the things I would like you to notice are the conjunctions that link one verse to another, going all the way from verse 16. For I am not ashamed of the gospel. For, linking verse 16 and verse 15. When you come to verse 17, you read also, For in it, in the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith. There is another conjunction linking the theme of verse 17 and 16. You come down to verse 18, Paul tells us, For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven. And this is to mean that the reason why the righteousness of God is revealed, it is because the precursor, the baseline, what makes that righteousness of God necessary, is the wrath of God that abides on every son of Adam who has not believed in the Son. And therefore the wrath of God in verse 18, we are told, is revealed. That is linked to verse 17. In verse 19, you read, Because. There is another conjunction that links verse 18 and 19. The reason why the wrath of God is revealed, in verse 19, we are told, Because what may be known of God is manifest in those who live and are trapped in ungodliness. And because they know, as you see in verse 20, because God has already revealed himself, and therefore out of their pride and arrogance, they suppress the truth of God in their unrighteousness. They prefer the darkness rather than the light, as Jesus would say in John chapter 3. The light has come to the world, but men loved darkness because their deeds were evil. And because of our proclivity to darkness, to unrighteousness, to what comforts the sinful nature, the wrath of God is inevitable for those who commit themselves and plunge to their own destruction. Especially as you see in verse 17, that even though we enjoy the comfort and the pleasures of sin, verse 17 tells us that the guilt that we bear is because God has revealed himself and his character. What may be known of God has been manifest in us. And as we saw last time, it is God himself who has shown these things or revealed himself to us. Now, when you read verse 20, therefore, you see another conjunction. For since the creation of the world, so that word for appears again, and it links verse 19 and 20. The fact that God has revealed himself, the apostle now seeks to answer how exactly God has revealed himself. And therefore in verse 20, since the creation, that is a question of time, that God has not thought recently how to reveal himself. But since the creation of the world, since the very beginning of everything that we see, God's invisible attributes are clearly seen. We might not see his hands and his face We might not see his body, as it were. We might not see his physical being or his being in physical form. But here we are told that his invisible attributes are clearly seen. And Paul goes on to answer how. How can you see that which is invisible? Because that looks like a contradiction. It's a logical contradiction. If something is invisible, by the very definition of invisible, you really are talking about that which you cannot see with the naked eye. But as you read on, Paul clarifies what he means. That the invisible attributes of God, that God that we don't see and smell and touch and feel, that being who is the creator of the heavens and the earth, since he created the world, he has left his footprints everywhere. And therefore, the apostle says that God's attributes are understood by the things that are made. This is as if to say that the reason why the creation exists, they exist, as John Calvin would say, as witnesses to God. That they point us to an end. They are not an end in themselves. And often we confuse the creature with the creator. And you have some forms of philosophies such as pantheism that focus on the worship or argue that God is in everything. And while that is the case, and while we believe that God is in the rocks and in the mountains, he's in the trees and in the sea, he's in the sun and in the galaxy, but he is not the rock, he is not the sea, he is not the galaxy and the sun, he's not the trees and the mountains, even though he is in them all. And so that's the distinction between our faith and pantheism that confuses that which is created with the creator. It would be foolishness for me to see a work of art and I marvel at the work of art and I forget that that is a skill of a person behind it. And so it's important for us here to again draw attention to the fact that what we see in the world is the art of God, that himself has left us with witnesses. And Paul would say that again in the book of Acts chapter 17 and also Acts in chapter 14. And so what we are getting at here is to see that God's invisible attributes, even though we might not see him, even though he is not visible to the naked eye, but there is enough evidence. There is sufficient evidence to demonstrate the character of God. And for that reason, we are guilty. Because this is God's exam. He has given us the evidence of himself. If you go back to Psalm chapter 19, you see again what John Calvin would refer to as dumb witnesses. And look at verse 1 of chapter 19. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. Day unto day utters speech, and night unto night reveals knowledge. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. Their line has gone out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. If you look at the psalmist here, he says that the heavens, which do not speak, they don't have eyes, they don't even have a soul or a spirit. As far as we know, they are not living things. But we are told here that they declare, they uncover, they scream, they shout, not just the existence of God, but his glory. They declare openly that there is an artist behind them all. It goes on to say the firmament, the created world, shows God's handiwork. How does a firmament show It has no soul. It cannot show anything. And yet Scripture here tells us the heavens, even though they have no lips, they declare. And the firmament, even though it has no eyes, no sight, but it shows his handiwork. It goes on to say in verse 3, day unto day, both the firmament and the heavens, they utter, they speak speech. And night unto night, they reveal knowledge. And verse 3 tells us that there is no speech, no language where their voice is not heard. That you cannot say, I don't understand English and therefore I cannot understand creation. Or I don't know French and therefore God makes no sense to me. The psalmist says that there is sufficient evidence from all these witnesses that there are God's footprints everywhere, that he has left them so that they may declare and tell of his attributes. And look at what, again, verse 20 tells us, that some of these attributes that are declared by the creation, by everything that is made, it is God's eternal power and his Godhead. And then he goes on to qualify that because that declaration is made by the firmament and the heavens and all created things, they have no soul. They are not made in the image of God, and yet they are witnesses of not just the existence of God, but his glory. Then here we are told that in our arrogance, in our debts and pride that we are trapped in our ungodliness and rebellion, we are without excuse. I will pick up from that in our next episode.